My name is Venessa Hart, and last month my parents texted me they were too tired from my sister's trip to attend my graduation. I simply replied, "Rest well." What they didn't know was that I was the valedictorian at Harvard, and the next morning my speech was everywhere. By noon, my parents were calling non-stop, panicking as reporters asked why their seats were the only ones left empty. Have you ever been dismissed by your own family until your success made them realize what they'd lost? Tell me where you're watching from and stay with me, because what happened next changed everything. When I think of my childhood, what I remember most isn't laughter or chaos, but the silence that followed every celebration that wasn't mine. We lived in a small town in Indiana, a place where everyone knew each other's last names, and your worth was often measured by how proudly your parents spoke of you at church on Sunday. For the Harts, that pride had a name: Chloe. My little sister, the golden one. She was sunshine in every room, the child who drew attention without even trying, while I, the older one, was the afterthought. The quiet presence introduced with a single line that would echo through my life for years. "This is Venessa, Chloe's sister." That sentence became my label, the footnote to someone else's story. I still remember my 10th birthday vividly, not because it was special, but because it was the moment I realized how invisible I had become. The living room was covered in pink and gold balloons, but they weren't for me. Mom had ordered a cake that read, "Congratulations, Chloe," in thick white frosting because my sister had won her first dance competition the week before. I stood beside it, smiling for pictures that were never mine, holding a slice of cake with my name spelled wrong on the napkin. "Isabel." When I asked if we could maybe light some candles for my birthday, Mom said gently, "Oh, honey, we already have all this set up. Let's not make it complicated." So, I clapped for Chloe with everyone else. Later that night, when the guests had gone home and the confetti was swept away, I found my gift sitting on the table and an used notebook from Dad's office, the kind he got for free at work conferences. On the cover, in small print, it said, "Midwest Accounting Expo 2006. That night, while Chloe fell asleep, surrounded by new pink trophies, I opened that notebook and began to write, not knowing it would become my first act of rebellion, writing down everything I couldn't say out loud. Chloe was 2 years younger than me, but somehow lived 2 steps ahead in everyone's eyes. At school, teachers smiled at her because they already adored the sweet, confident Hart girl. When people realized we were sisters, they'd raise their brows and say, "Really? You two don't look alike," as if that explained everything. Chloe was graceful and easy, the kind of girl who knew how to make people love her without effort. I was the girl who fixed the Wi-Fi when it broke, stayed after class to finish the lab setup, or sat in the back reading manuals for fun. It didn't matter how high my grades were or how often I helped others. When family gathered, the conversations always circled back to her. Her recital, her new hairstyle, her smile that lit up a room. My name rarely came up unless someone needed help connecting the DVD player or fixing the Christmas lights. There was one spring afternoon that still sits like a stone in my memory. The local middle school was hosting the annual science fair, and I had spent 3 weeks building a small model wind turbine from spare parts I found at the town's junk shop. I even painted it white and silver, and when it spun under the gym's fluorescent lights, it almost shimmered. When they called my name for first place, the applause felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. I looked toward the audience instinctively, searching for the faces that mattered most. Mom, Dad, maybe even Chloe. But the row of seats where they should have been was empty. I kept smiling as the principal shook my hand, the camera flash popping, but in that moment, I felt a sharp hollowness inside. Later that night, Mom apologized over dinner. "Sweetheart, we really wanted to come," she said, not looking at me, "but your sister had her prom fitting, and you know how hard those appointments are to get." Dad nodded, chewing slowly, like the conversation was already over. I nodded, too. That was the night I learned that my achievements could only exist in silence. After that, I stopped expecting to be seen. Instead, I learned to find comfort in small hidden victories. I spent hours in the garage taking apart old radios or fixing the neighbor's broken lawnmower, the smell of oil and dust becoming my favorite perfume. I liked the way machines responded, predictable, fair, never choosing favorites. If something didn't work, there was a reason. If you were patient enough, you could find it and make it right again. I think deep down, I wished people worked the same way. Grandma Helen was the only one who ever noticed how I shrank. She lived 2 blocks away in a small white house that always smelled like cinnamon and lavender. One evening, after hearing about the science fair, she came to see me. I was in the garage hunched over a radio with my hands covered in grease. She didn't scold me for the mess or ask why I wasn't inside helping Chloe choose dresses for her next recital. She just watched me for a while and said softly, "You don't need applause to be valuable, sweetheart. Some of the brightest stars burn quietly where no one looks." I didn't answer, but her words stayed, echoing louder than any praise I had ever received. Over the years, I learned how to live in that shadow without letting it crush me. At family dinners, I smiled when Chloe spoke. When Mom boasted about her dance scholarships or Dad pulled out new photos to show their friends, I passed the dishes, nodded, and quietly withdrew into the background. I became the calm one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need attention. But while they mistook my silence for weakness, I was collecting something powerful: patience, discipline, and the ability to stand on my own. Every time they forgot to show up, every time my name went unmentioned, I stored that feeling like energy in a battery. By the time I turned 17, I had already learned the art of disappearing quietly. I was the kind of student who blended into the corners of classrooms, always prepared, but never loud. On paper, I was thriving: straight A's, debate club, volunteering at the local library. But at home, none of it mattered. What mattered was still Chloe. By then, she was already the talk of our small Indiana town. Posters from her dance academy lined the local grocery store window, and every other conversation with my parents seemed to orbit around her next recital, her new costume, her bright future in performing arts. I used to stay up late in my room, surrounded by the hum of my old laptop, typing out essays for English class or tinkering with small data sets just to see patterns form on the screen. Words and numbers were the two languages that made sense to me. They never lied, never shifted affection, never forgot. I loved how logic could explain the world, but also how words could give it meaning. It was in those hours when the house was dark and Chloe's laughter floated faintly from across the hall that I began to feel something awaken in me. I didn't want to compete anymore. I wanted to understand people's systems, the quiet causes behind every human decision. One autumn morning during my senior year, my AP English teacher, Mr. Lee, announced the annual state essay competition. The topic was the price of silence in modern society. My pen hovered over the page for only a moment before I began writing almost feverishly. I didn't have to think. I simply described my world, the quiet of the dinner table, the unspoken favoritism, the ways people learn to live unseen. I disguised it as social commentary, citing psychology journals and public surveys. But in truth, every sentence was carved from my own life. When I turned it in, I expected nothing. Weeks passed and I nearly forgot about it until the morning Mr. Lee stopped me in the hallway, grinning. "Venessa," he said, holding up a letter embossed with the state seal. "You won first place." For a second, the words didn't register. I felt the rush of adrenaline, that rare spark of validation I hadn't known for years. The local paper even called the house that evening asking for a quote. Mom answered the phone, her voice bright at first until she realized the story wasn't about Chloe. "Oh, that's nice," she said after hanging up, glancing at me briefly. "But we really can't do an interview this week. We're busy packing for Chloe's competition in Chicago." I nodded, saying nothing. "Good job, sweetheart," Dad added without looking up from his tablet. Then, as if on cue, Mom asked him, "Did you finish booking the hotel for next weekend?" The conversation flowed smoothly back into Chloe's orbit, and I sat there invisible once again. Later that night, I folded the award letter and slipped it into my drawer. I told myself I didn't need their praise. But when I closed the drawer, my hands trembled, not from anger, but from the realization that no matter how hard I tried, home would never be a place that saw me. That same week, Mr. Lee called me into his classroom after school. "I've been watching you for 3 years now," he said, leaning back in his chair. "You think small because they make you feel small. But you don't belong in this town forever, Venessa." He told me he wanted to recommend me for Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, whatever I dared to reach for. The words felt foreign, almost impossible. Harvard was something that existed in news articles, not in the life of a girl who fixed the family Wi-Fi and ate dinner alone most nights. But he handed me a sealed envelope. "I've written you a letter of recommendation. A strong one," he said. "Don't let anyone talk you out of applying." Arid there that night, I opened my laptop and stared at the Harvard application portal. I filled in the fields slowly, each click feeling heavier than the last. For the essay, I wrote about building belonging in invisible spaces. It wasn't dramatic, it was honest. I described how silence could be both a wound and a source of strength. How those unseen often learn to listen deeper, to notice what others overlook. When I finished, I sent it off and shut my computer, my heart pounding like I just shouted for the first time in years. When Grandma heard about my essay, she came over the next afternoon carrying something wrapped in an old silk scarf. She handed it to me carefully. Inside was a small leather-bound notebook, the cover worn and soft from age. "It was mine when I was your age," she said. "I used to write poems here. When life made me feel small, I wrote until I remembered who I was. You should do the same. Write your voice, before the world tries to rewrite it for you." I traced the edges of the notebook, the faint scent of cedar and ink rising from it. And for the first time in a long while, I felt seen not as Chloe's sister, but as someone with her own story to tell. Months later, in the middle of a snowstorm, the letter came. I found it in the mailbox, its crimson crust gleaming through the frost. My hand shook as I tore it open on the porch, snowflakes melting into the paper. "Dear Venessa Hart, it is my pleasure to inform you that you have been accepted to Harvard College." The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. I stood there, the wind cutting against my face. But inside, I felt warmth, blooming proof that every quiet hour, every ignored victory had led here. When I walked inside, Mom was on the phone, laughing about Chloe's new recital costume. I waited for her to finish, then held out the letter, unable to hide my trembling. "I got in," I whispered. She blinked, paused, and smiled faintly. "Harvard, that's far, isn't it? Are you sure you want to go that far away?" Dad looked up from the couch and added, "You'd have more support if you stayed close to home. Chloe could use your help with applications next year." Their words felt like snowwaft, cold, and heavy. I nodded again, quietly, folding the letter and pressing it to my chest. That night, I wrote in Grandma's notebook, "They don't see it yet, but someday they will." I didn't know then that Harvard would become more than a school. It would become the proof that I existed beyond their shadow, the beginning of my own story. And even though my family reacted like it was nothing, I could feel the wind changing direction. Somewhere between the silence and the snow, I had taken my first real step away. The first time I stepped through the gates of Harvard Yard, I thought I'd crossed into another world. The air felt different, crisp, charged with the quiet hum of ambition. The autumn leaves had just started to turn, painting the cobblestone paths in shades of amber and rust. Students hurried between classes, with steaming cups of coffee, their laughter echoing under the Gothic arches. I remember standing there, suitcase in hand, staring up at the bell tower of Memorial Church, and whispering to myself, "You made it." But underneath the excitement was a sharp ache, a thought I couldn't shake. No one from home cared enough to see this. My dorm was in Mather House, a red brick building overlooking the Charles River. My roommate, Maya Patel, was everything I was: an outspoken, confident, and endlessly curious. She introduced herself before I even finished unpacking, asking about my major, my hometown, my favorite books. We talked until midnight that first night, and when I told her I came from a small town in Indiana, she smiled. "Then you must have fought hard to get here," she said simply. I didn't correct her. She had no idea how hard. Harvard life was beautiful and brutal all at once. The morning smelled of espresso and ink, and the nights were lit by the glow of laptop screens in dorm windows. I worked part-time at Widner Library to pay for meals that my scholarship didn't cover, shelving heavy volumes long after the building emptied out. The rhythm of the scanner beep, the rustle of old paper, it became a lullaby of survival. Some nights I'd stay until the guards turned off the lights, then walk back to my dorm through the fog rising over the river. My stomach growled more often than not, but I told myself hunger was just another form of discipline. I learned to stretch everything: time, money, energy. Instant ramen became a staple. So did secondhand textbooks and thrift store coats. Maya used to tease me for eating cereal with water when the milk ran out, but she never judged. "You're like iron," she said once, handing me half her sandwich. "Bend, but never break." We'd study together at the Science Center cafe, surrounded by the quiet frenzy of overachievers. When exhaustion hit, I'd slip into Memorial Church, where the soft light through the stained glass painted the pews in gold. It was the one place that felt like stillness amid the storm. Academically, I pushed myself harder than ever. I joined the Harvard College Women in Tech Club during sophomore year, eventually leading it by senior year. I also worked as a research assistant under Dean Alvarez, a woman who believed fiercely in the power of inclusion in technology. She became the mentor I never had. "Talent means nothing if it isn't shared," she told me one afternoon as we reviewed data sets on healthcare equity. That conversation changed the direction of my studies. I shifted my focus toward using data and AI to improve medical access in low-income communities. For the first time, I wasn't just chasing grades. I was chasing purpose. But success didn't erase the loneliness. Each time I received an award or presented research, I'd glance at the row of chairs reserved for family at the back of the auditorium. They were always empty. The reserved signs fluttered slightly in the air conditioning, mocking reminders of who hadn't shown up. I told myself it didn't matter. But when the ceremony ended and other students ran into the arms of their parents, I felt that old ache return, the same ache from the empty seat at the science fair years ago. Mom's texts came rarely, and when they did, they were never about me. Your sister just got back from her trip to Italy. She sent us the prettiest photos. Or, we're so proud of Chloe, she got a mention in the town paper. There was never a, how are your classes? Or we miss you. I used to reply politely, tell her congrats, but eventually I stopped answering altogether. It wasn't bitterness, it was exhaustion. You can only reach for someone so many times before your hands start to tremble from the weight of disappointment. Still, I built something of my own. During junior year, I led a team project that used predictive models to optimize medical supply distribution in rural hospitals, a prototype that later caught the attention of a Boston nonprofit. When they invited me to present at a symposium, I emailed my parents the event details just in case. The reply came a week later. That's nice, honey. We'll be in Nashville that weekend for Chloe's showcase. Send photos. I didn't bother to send any. But that night, as I stood on stage explaining our algorithm to a panel of professionals, I imagined Grandma sitting somewhere in the back, nodding proudly. It was enough to steady me. Maya became the closest thing I had to family there. When winter break came and the dorms emptied out, she always insisted I visit her family in New Jersey. You shouldn't spend Christmas alone, she said. But I usually stayed in Cambridge, volunteering at the community center or taking extra shifts at Widner. I told her I preferred the quiet, though the truth was simpler. Going home didn't feel like home anymore. Every time I called, it felt like dialing into another planet. Chloe was thriving as always. New job offers, new admirers, new reasons for my parents to celebrate. During my final year, Dean Alvarez nominated me for the Harvard Innovation in Public Impact Fellowship. When I received the letter of acceptance, Maya and I screamed so loud the RA came knocking. That night, she lit 2 small candles on the windowsill and said, one for where you came from, one for where you're going. I laughed. But later, as I watched the wax melt, I realized how much I owed to the people who had shown up in small, quiet ways. The teachers, the mentors, the friends, who filled the empty spaces my family left behind. Commencement season approached faster than I expected. I had been shortlisted to deliver the student speech at graduation, a dream I barely dared to whisper. When I received confirmation that I'd been chosen as the valedictorian speaker, I stared at the email for a long time, my throat tightening. It felt like everything, every silent dinner, every ignored achievement, every lonely night had led to that moment. I wanted to tell my parents to share even a fragment of pride, but then my phone buzzed with a photo from Mom. Chloe on a beach in Santorini captioned, our beautiful girl living her best life. I closed my phone and looked out the dorm window at the lights flickering across the river. In the reflection of the glass, I saw myself tired, older, but still standing. I thought of Grandma's words from years ago. You don't need applause to be valuable. She was right. Maybe they would never come to see me. Maybe that seat would always stay empty. But I was done chasing their gaze. From that point on, I decided one thing. I would give my best speech. Not for those who never showed up, but for those who did. For Maya, for Dean Alvarez, for Grandma, for every quiet student who ever stared at an empty chair and kept going anyway. Because if they wouldn't come to see me, the world would. The email arrived just after midnight when the campus was silent except for the whisper of snow brushing against the windows. I had been revising a research proposal when my laptop pinged with a new notification from the Harvard Office of Student Affairs. I almost ignored it thinking it was another update about graduation logistics, but the subject line made me freeze. Congratulations, you have been selected as the 2024 student commencement speaker. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. The cursor blinked on the screen like a heartbeat, steady and alive, as the words sank in. Out of more than 1,000 graduating seniors, they had chosen me. I stared at the letter, my hands trembling slightly, and then laughter sharp and breathless escaped my throat. The kind that comes from disbelief rather than joy. I reread it twice, searching for any sign of a mistake, any sentence that might start with, unfortunately. But it was real. I was the speaker, the voice of my class. The girl, once forgotten, at her own science fair, would now stand at the podium of Harvard Yard, where presidents, poets, and scholars had stood before. Maya burst into my room a few minutes later after seeing my message. You did it, she yelled, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely speak. We jumped around our dorm room like 2 kids who had just discovered gravity didn't apply to them anymore. You're going to make them cry, she said between laughter. No pressure, though. The following week was a blur of meetings. I sat in the dean's office surrounded by faculty members, administrators, and the student life coordinator as they outlined the process, submission of a full written draft, review sessions, and rehearsal on the stage at Sanders Theater. They explained that my speech would be televised live on Boston 25 and streamed nationally through GBH. The weight of it settled on me like snowfall, beautiful, heavy, and a little terrifying. I spent nights hunched over Grandma's old leather notebook trying to find the words. I didn't want to write a perfect speech. I wanted to write an honest one. I thought of every empty chair I had ever faced, the ones at the science fair, the fellowship ceremony, the research showcase, and the ones that would surely be waiting at my graduation. That's when the title came to me. From the empty chair to the open microphone, the first line came naturally. When they didn't see us, we learned to see each other. It wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who had ever been overlooked, underestimated, or told they didn't belong. I wrote about the janitor who stayed late cleaning the library floors. About Maya who shared her last sandwich during exam week. About first-generation students who worked 2 jobs to afford textbooks. About those who built their dreams quietly while the world applauded someone else. During my first rehearsal at Sanders Theater, I stood at the podium, staring out into the empty rows of red velvet seats. The sound of my own voice echoed faintly through the cavernous hall. The microphone hissed softly, and the air smelled of polished wood and history. "Good evening," I began, my tone shaking just slightly. I used to think silence was my punishment, but now I see it was my training ground. The moment I said it, I felt the truth vibrate through me like music. Dean Alvarez sat in the back row listening. When I finished, she walked up to the stage, eyes glinting. "You're not just speaking for yourself, Venessa," she said quietly. "You're speaking for every student who ever felt invisible. That's power. Don't be afraid of it." That night, lying in bed, I wondered if I should tell my parents. Part of me wanted to the hopeful part that still believed maybe this time they would show up. Maybe they'd be proud. Maybe they'd even come early, sit in the front row, and see me not as the shadow of Chloe, but as someone who had finally stepped into the light. I opened my phone and started typing a message. "Hey, I have some news about graduation." But before I could finish, another message arrived from Mom. "Just got Chloe's itinerary. She's going to Paris for a law conference. Can you believe it?" There was a photo attached. Chloe posing by an airport lounge with champagne in hand. My fingers froze. I deleted my draft. I knew deep down the truth I had always refused to say aloud. They wouldn't come even if I asked. They would be too tired or too busy or too far, and I didn't want to give them another chance to choose someone else over me. This time I wanted the truth to reveal itself without words. So I decided to say nothing. Let the world show them instead. The days leading up to commencement were exhausting but exhilarating. Between thesis presentations, media interviews, and rehearsals, I barely had time to sleep. Yet, every time I crossed Harvard Yard, I felt that quiet joy bloom again. Because the journey wasn't just mine. It belonged to every version of me that had once felt small. One afternoon, after a final run-through at Sanders Theater, I stayed behind as the staff packed up microphones. The hall was empty again, sunlight pouring through the stained glass windows, casting long gold streaks across the stage. I stood at the center, staring at the microphone. It looked simple, almost fragile. And yet, that thin metal stem had outlasted centuries of voices, some powerful, some forgotten. I reached out, tracing my finger along its cool surface. From the empty chair to the open mic, I whispered again just to feel how the words tasted in the air. When I walked out into the yard, the campus was buzzing with pre-graduation energy. Families toured the grounds, snapping photos under the John Harvard statue. Students carried boxes, hugging each other with tears in their eyes. I passed a bulletin board where a flyer fluttered gently in the wind. The bold letters read, "Harvard Commencement 2024, Student Speaker Venessa Hart." Beneath it, a small print added, "Live on GBH and Boston 25. I stood there for a moment, staring at my own name, printed in black against the crimson background. It didn't feel real. For years, I had chased acknowledgement, only to realize that the loudest validation comes from within. Still, the thought made me smile, a quiet knowing smile meant not for the world but for the girl who once sat in that cold gymnasium waiting for her family to show up. That night, I sent Grandma a photo of the flyer. She replied within minutes. "I knew your voice would find its place. Don't dim it for anyone." So I didn't. I decided I would walk onto that stage not to prove anything to my parents, not even to Chloe, but to speak for the invisible, to lift the ones still sitting at empty tables. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't silence, it's being heard. And soon they would hear me whether they meant to or not. 2 weeks before graduation, the campus was alive with celebration. Students posed in their crimson gowns beneath the arches of Harvard Yard, cameras flashing, laughter echoing down every corridor. Maya and I were in the dorm, pinning our tassels to our caps, when my phone buzzed with a message from Mom. I almost didn't check it. "Experience. had taught me that texts from home rarely brought joy, but curiosity won for a second. The message was short, almost mechanical. "We're too tired from your sister's trip to attend your graduation, honey. Just got back from Europe with her. The flights were awful. Well, rest this weekend and celebrate properly when we see you next time. Love you." I reread it 3 times, the words blurring until the meaning settled like a cold stone in my chest. Too tired. That was their reason. Not a family emergency, not a financial strain. Just tired from following Chloe through Europe while she signed a contract with a prestigious law firm and attended networking events in Paris. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stared at the message, the faint reflection of my face in the glass of the phone screen. Maya looked up from across the room, sensing something shift. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded once, the smallest of smiles tugging at my mouth. "Yeah," I said softly. "Just expected." Then without hesitation, I typed my reply. "Rest well." No sarcasm, no confrontation, just 2 words that said everything. Because this time, I didn't feel the urge to explain or beg or pretend it didn't hurt. I'd done all of that before. And still, the chair had always been empty. That night, as the lights of Cambridge flickered beyond my window, I decided to do something for myself. Not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. If they wouldn't show up, I would still make space for those who did. The next morning, I went to the commencement office and quietly requested 3 family seats. When the coordinator asked if I wanted to use all 3, I smiled faintly. "Yes," I said. "One for my grandmother, one for my best friend, and one just to stay empty." The woman gave me a puzzled look, but nodded, writing down the names I provided. Helen Moore, family guest; Maya Patel, friend. 4. The third seat, she left a blank line. I picked up the pen and wrote in neat handwriting, "Reserved for who shows up." The next few days passed in a blur of last-minute preparations, speech reviews, robe fittings, class photos. Yet beneath the noise, there was a stillness inside me. Every time I imagined my parents sitting in the crowd, I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt distance, like remembering someone else's dream. Maya, ever perceptive, brought it up one night over tea in the dorm lounge. "You sure you're okay with them not coming?" she asked, tucking her legs beneath her. "You don't even sound upset." "Oh, Lena, I'm not," I said truthfully. "I think I stopped hoping a long time ago. And maybe that's a good thing. Sometimes peace comes when you stop asking people to be who they've shown you they're not." She nodded, her eyes soft. "Then let's fill the empty seat with something better." "Like what?" "Flowers." She said, "Something beautiful." So we did. The day before graduation, we went to a small florist shop off Massachusetts Avenue. The air was thick with the scent of lilac and pays. I chose white tulips, Grandma's favorite, and a single crimson rose in the middle, the color of Harvard's crest. It wasn't about mourning their absence. It was about honoring presence, the kind that required no applause, no explanation, no perfection. Back at the dorm, I arranged the flowers myself. The next morning, I'd place them on that third seat. A quiet offering, a reminder that even absence can be acknowledged with grace. Graduation morning dawned with golden light spilling across the cobblestones. The air was sharp and bright, the kind of day that felt too big for disappointment. I slipped into my gown and cap, pinning a small silver brooch shaped like a book, the one Grandma had given me when I got my acceptance letter. Maya fussed over her camera, promising she'd record every second for Grandma and for the archives of poetic justice. When we reached her Centenary Theater, the place was already alive with color and sound. Hundreds of students in crimson robes, families waving from the audience, the hum of chatter mingling with the solemn notes of the orchestra tuning up. I handed the usher my seating card, and he guided me to the family section reserved under my name. 3 seats side by side, wrapped in morning light. Grandma arrived just as the bells began to ring, her steps slow but steady. She wore a pale blue coat and carried her cane like it was part of her strength, not her weakness. When she saw the seats, she smiled knowingly. "You left one open," she said. I nodded. "Always." She touched the bouquet gently, fingers tracing the petals. "It's perfect," she whispered. "A place for whoever's heart remembers to show up next time." When Maya joined us, camera slung over her shoulder, she tucked one of the tulips behind Grandma's lapel and winked at me. "Ready to make history?" I laughed softly, ready to breathe. As I turned to walk toward the stage with the other speakers, I looked back once. Grandma's face glowed in the morning sun, Maya adjusting her lens beside her, and the third seat, empty but not lonely, gleamed with the white of tulips and the deep red of that single rose. For the first time, the sight of that chair didn't hurt. It felt symbolic, no longer a reminder of what I lacked, but proof of what I had built. Love that showed up, even if it came from unexpected places. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, the crimson sea of graduates before me, the orchestra swelling behind. Somewhere among the rows, my parents' absence had already become irrelevant, because I knew who was there. And more importantly, I knew who I had become in the spaces they'd left behind. The morning of commencement felt like a dream stitched together by sunlight and wind. Bells from Memorial Church rang across Harvard Yard, their deep bronze echoes weaving through the sea of crimson robes. The air smelled faintly of lilac and polished wood. Flags rippled against the blue sky, crimson and white folding into each other like pages of a story that had finally reached its turning point. I stood at the edge of Tercentenary Theater where thousands of chairs stretched in careful rows across the lawn. Students adjusted caps, professors in velvet hoods murmured to one another, photographers darted through the aisles. For a moment, I just stood there and breathed because this was the sound of endings and beginnings all at once. The orchestra began tuning, soft strings swelling into the familiar notes of pomp and circumstance. Around me, my classmates laughed, whispering goodbyes that felt like promises. Maya, 2 rows behind, gave me a small thumbs up. The tassel brushed my cheek as I adjusted my cap and glanced toward the family section. Rows of white folding chairs divided neatly by golden ropes. The sunlight glinted off name tags. One read Helen Moore, family guest. Another read Maya Patel, friend. And beside them, the third seat, the one marked reserved for who shows up, stood quiet, crowned with the bouquet of white tulips and a single crimson rose. The seats that should have held my parents were empty. For a moment, the sight hit me harder than I expected. Even knowing, even preparing, it still felt like a tiny fracture under the skin and old bruise I'd thought had faded. I could see families hugging, mothers waving flags, fathers snapping photos with trembling hands. All that sound joyful, proud, messy rose like a wave around me. Yet in the center of it all, those empty chairs stayed still, untouched by the wind. Then, as if to balance the silence, I caught sight of movement. Grandma. Slowly, carefully, she made her way down the aisle, cane in hand, guided by one of the ushers. Her pale blue coat shimmered faintly in the morning light. Every few steps, she paused to steady herself, her free hand brushing the arm of each chair she passed, as though blessing them. When she reached me, I felt something inside me unclench. She smiled, eyes bright beneath her wide-brimmed hat. Today, she said, placing her hand gently over mine. You are seen. The words landed like a whisper and a thunderclap all at once. I swallowed hard, afraid to blink because the tears sat too close. Thank you for coming, I managed to say, my voice barely above a breath. Her hand lingered on mine for a moment longer. Of course I came, she said softly. I wouldn't miss watching the girl they overlooked become the woman they'll never forget. Then she squeezed my fingers, turned, and took her seat beside the flowers. The crowd began to settle. The air filled with the rustle of program papers, the murmur of names being read, the shuffling of robes. Above us, the banners of each house waved proudly. Adams, Lell, Mather, symbols of belonging. I lifted my eyes to the trees surrounding the yard. The sunlight filtered through the branches, painting moving patterns on the rows of students, glinting off the tassels like 100 small stars. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely present, rooted and free in the same breath. When the procession began, the faculty led us in, their black robes sweeping the grass. The air carried the sweet tension of history. Harvard had seen centuries of commencements, but for each of us this one felt singular. As we moved toward our seats, a choir from Memorial Church began to sing, Fair Harvard, we join in thy jubilee throng. The melody floated upward, soft and grand, threading through the trees and catching on the edges of my gown. I sat, heart pounding, while the university president delivered her address about resilience, unity, and courage in uncertain times. I tried to listen, but the sound of my heartbeat drowned everything else. Every breath I took felt like it carried years. Every sleepless night, every empty dinner, every ignored success, all of it had led here to this single moment where I was no longer defined by who hadn't shown up. When my name was announced as student commencement speaker, the world blurred for a second. I stood, feeling the collective gaze of thousands turn toward me. The sound of applause rolled through the yard like a wave, rising and falling before settling into silence. I walked slowly toward the podium, the red carpet soft under my shoes, the air vibrating with expectation. From the stage, the view was breathtaking. Beyond the rows of crimson gowns, the family section shimmered with color, flowers, hats, banners, and in the middle of it, that one empty chair gleamed like a quiet declaration. The tulips swayed in the breeze. Grandma lifted her head slightly, eyes on me, and even from that distance, I could see her mouthing something I didn't need to hear aloud. I see you. A hush fell over the crowd. The microphone buzzed faintly. I adjusted it. My hands surprisingly steady, and looked out at the sea of faces. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying farther than I thought it could. "When they didn't see us, we learned to see each other." A ripple moved through the audience, soft, attentive. I spoke about the unseen students, the quiet ones who worked behind the spotlight, who built foundations others stood on. I spoke of how belonging wasn't given. It was built chair by chair, hand by hand. I spoke of how silence had once felt like punishment, but became my strength, how absence taught me to create presence for others. As I spoke, the sun broke through the clouds. The light poured over the stage, warming my face, blinding. For a moment, it felt like the world was listening, not just Harvard, but everyone who had ever been made small. When I reached the end, I said simply, "May we remember to leave no chair empty for those who come after us, because when the world forgets to see them, we must." The applause began slowly, then grew until it filled the yard. Students rose, clapping, cheering, some wiping their eyes. I looked down one last time toward the family seats. Grandma was standing now, hands clasped at her chest, tears glistening on her cheeks. Maya stood beside her, filming through blurred vision, laughing and crying at once. The empty seat remained, flowers trembling in the breeze. I didn't feel loss anymore. I felt peace. That chair wasn't a symbol of rejection. It was a promise that I'd never forget where I came from or what it took to get here. As the music swelled again, caps flew into the sky, arcs of crimson spinning against the blue. For the first time, I joined in throwing mine high and watching it disappear into the Sunday. The sound of bells from Memorial Church rang again, loud and full, echoing through the yard. When I stepped down from the stage, the world felt lighter. Grandma met me halfway, steady despite her cane, and pressed her hand against my heart. "You did it," she whispered. "They may have been tired, but the world is wide awake now." I smiled through tears, the paper program still warm in my hand, its edges fluttering like wings in the wind. In that moment, I knew the truth she meant. I didn't need their presence to be seen. I was already shining in the only way that mattered, completely and finally on my own. The podium lights felt warmer than I expected, spilling gold across the edges of my gown. The air inside Tercentenary Theater was still thousands of breaths held at once, waiting. I took one steady inhale, then glanced toward the family section. 3 seats, Grandma, Maya, and between them, that one empty chair crowned with white tulips and a single crimson rose. The sunlight from above touched the petals until they glowed. I let my eyes rest there for a heartbeat before I began. "Good morning," I said softly. My voice echoed through the yard, steadier than I felt. "If you look closely at the audience today, you might notice something small. Somewhere in this sea of faces, there's an empty chair." A few people shifted, glancing around. I smiled faintly. I used to think an empty chair meant failure, meant no one cared enough to fill it. But over the years, I've learned something different. Sometimes the empty chair is proof that we showed up for ourselves. Even when no one else did, the microphone caught every pause, every breath. It didn't feel like performing, it felt like confession. I grew up in a small town where silence was often mistaken for strength. I learned early how to be quiet, how to work hard, how to smile through being overlooked. And when no one sat in the audience, I told myself it didn't matter. But here's the truth. Every time someone chooses not to show up for you, someone else quietly, humbly does. I looked toward the back rows where the janitorial staff stood, still in their blue uniforms, watching from the aisles. "So today," I said, "I want to begin by thanking the people whose chairs are never empty because they never stop showing up for others." The applause began softly, faculty clapping first, then students joining in, the sound building until it filled the yard. I waited, smiling through the lump in my throat. When the applause faded, I continued. "At Harvard, we talk about excellence a lot. But no one tells you that excellence often depends on the invisible ones. The friends who share notes after an all-nighter. The dining staff who leave a plate aside for you when you miss dinner. The librarians who unlock rooms early because they see you waiting in the cold. The professors who don't just read your essays but your silences." Double saying, I could see Maya filming discreetly from the side, tears welling. Dean Alvarez sat near the front, her expression soft but proud. "I came here thinking success was about being chosen," I said. "But what I learned is that success is really about choosing. Choosing persistence over comfort. Choosing to see others when no one saw you. Choosing to stay kind even when the world gives you every reason not to be." The audience was completely silent now. Even the wind seemed to pause. I leaned forward slightly, voice low but clear. "For those of us who grew up believing we didn't have a seat at the table, listen to me. You don't need to wait for one. Build your own." That line, "build your own seat," was the heart of everything. The reason I'd written this speech. The reason I'd survived the years of silence and smallness. When you build your own seat, I continued, you stop chasing approval. You stop measuring your worth by who claps for you. You start realizing you were never supposed to fit into someone else's table, you were meant to create your own. And then pull up extra chairs for those still standing. The wind caught the corners of the paper in my hands, making them flutter like wings. I pressed them down gently. When they pushed us aside, we learned how to make space. When they spoke over us, we learned how to listen deeply. And when they forgot our names, we carved them ourselves into history. Ah! A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Somewhere near the back, a voice called out softly, "Amen." I smiled. Look around you. Every person here today was carried by someone unseen. Maybe it was a mentor, a sibling, a grandmother, a stranger. Maybe it was the version of yourself who refused to quit. Whoever it was, remember them. Remember that they showed up. And when it's your turn, show up for someone else. I paused, then glanced again toward the family section. The camera operators noticed lenses shifting in unison. A broadcast camera zoomed in the flowers, the sunlight, Grandma's hand resting on her cane. She lifted her head, smiling, faintly as the camera found her, and for a second her eyes met mine. The image would later become the photo that went viral. The valedictorian looking toward her grandmother, an empty chair and a bouquet between them. I looked straight into the lens. To my grandmother, who always said, "You don't need applause to be valuable. Thank you. You showed up." And to anyone sitting in the crowd today, carrying your own kind of empty chair, this moment is for you. Applause thundered, rolling across the yard like a wave. I waited, eyes stinging, then lifted my chin for the final lines. Titles don't define us. Degrees don't define us. What defines us is the courage to build and the kindness to share what we've built. Because one day someone will stand where we stand now. And the question won't be what you achieved. It'll be who did you make room for. I let the silence stretch for a beat. May we all remember this. The tables of power are temporary, but the tables of compassion, the ones we build ourselves last. A standing ovation rose from the crowd. Faculty, students, even the choir stood, flags waved, caps lifted. The cameras swept across the scene, the sunlight turning everything gold, the tulips gleaming like little fires. From the corner of my eye, I saw Grandma wipe her cheeks, her lips moving soundlessly. Later, when I hugged her, she would tell me she'd whispered, "They see you now." But in that moment, I didn't need confirmation. I felt it. I felt it in the roar of the applause, in the rhythm of 1,000 hearts clapping for more than a speech, for survival, for recognition, for every unseen student who had ever dared to take up space. The orchestra began again, slow and reverent. I stepped back from the podium as the president of the university shook my hand. My cap tassel brushed my face as I bowed slightly, and when I turned to walk off stage, the camera caught one last close-up, me looking over my shoulder at that empty chair. Online, the broadcast clip would loop for days, shared with captions like "She built her own seat" and "From silence to spotlight." #spread number, build your own seat number, empty chair speech number. Venessa Hart 2024 students from other universities began sharing photos of their own ceremonies with small notes taped to chairs reading, "Reserved for who shows up." I didn't know any of that yet. Standing on that stage, all I knew was that for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I was proving anything. I was simply being. The sunlight poured through the trees and the air smelled like possibility. Warm, clean, infinite. I glanced one last time at Grandma, at Maya, at the chair that once symbolized absence, and now somehow belonging. Then I whispered to myself, not into the mic, but into the wind, "We're seen now." And when I stepped down, the crowd still on their feet, I realized, this was never just my story. It was everyone's who had ever learned to build their own seat. When the ceremony ended and the crowd began to scatter across the yard, the air still shimmered with applause that hadn't quite faded. The crimson robes, the flying caps, the laughter, all of it blended into a haze of gold and red under the mid-afternoon Sunday. I stood at the edge of the stage for a long moment, still clutching the folded copy of my speech. My hands were trembling, not from nerves anymore, but from release. The years of silence, of being overlooked, had poured out of me in 10 minutes of truth. Maya found me first. She came running through the sea of gowns, waving her phone like a victory flag. "It's everywhere," she gasped between breaths. "Venessa, they're already clipping it." I frowned, half smiling. "Clipping what?" She turned the screen toward me. There it was, the university's live stream replay. My speech already uploaded with the caption, "Build your own seat. Harvard student speaker moves audience to tears." In the corner of the thumbnail, the image froze on the shot of me glancing at the empty chair, the flowers gleaming like a quiet rebellion. I hadn't even walked out of the yard before the first notification buzzed through my phone. Then another, then a flood. Mentions, messages, tags. At first, I thought it was from classmates' congratulations, little bursts of celebration, but then I saw the caller ID lighting up my screen. Mom, then Dad, then Chloe. I stared at the phone for a long time as it kept vibrating in my palm. My thumb hovered over the screen, the name Mom pulsing like a small heartbeat. I didn't answer. Instead, I pressed mute and slipped it into the pocket of my gown. We took photos instead. Maya insisted on every possible angle by the John Harvard statue in front of Memorial Church beneath the yard's elm trees where ribbons of sunlight fell across the bricks. Grandma stood between us in her pale blue coat, clutching my arm for balance. Every few minutes, she'd shake her head softly, still astonished. You know, she said, they're never going to stop talking about that speech. I smiled. Maybe not, but I hope they remember why I said it. Oh, by evening, the university's social accounts had shared the clip. Boston 25 aired a segment during the 6 o'clock news. Harvard valedictorian delivers viral message about inclusion and resilience. The reporter's voice narrated over the image of me on stage with a subtitle flashing across the bottom. From an empty chair to a full audience, that was when the text started pouring in. From Mom, why didn't you tell us? Everyone's asking why we weren't there. You made it sound like we don't care about you. From Dad, we look awful. Venessa, couldn't you have warned us? From Chloe, wow. Guess we're the villains now, huh? Next time, maybe loop us in before you go public. I read each message slowly, then placed the phone face down on the table beside my untouched coffee. There was a time when those words would have sent me spiraling, rewriting replies in my head, trying to explain myself into being understood. But not today. Today, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Maya sitting across from me in the cafe near the Charles River watched me quietly. You're not going to respond? She asked. I shook my head. Not now. Today isn't about explaining. It's about graduating. She smiled. The kind that said she understood completely. Good, she said. Because the rest of the world is about to start calling too. She wasn't exaggerating. Within an hour, my inbox was overflowing. An email from Harvard Alumni Affairs congratulating me and requesting permission to share my transcript in their newsletter. A message from a TEDx curator in DC. Your speech resonated deeply. Would you consider expanding it into a talk for our fall event? A note from a fellowship program in Geneva focusing on technology and social impact. We saw your research on equitable access to healthcare data and your story. Let's discuss opportunities. Each message arrived like a ripple spreading wider and wider. Professors forwarding it, alumni commenting, classmates tagging me on posts with captions like proud doesn't even begin to cover it. Someone on social media had clipped the line when they didn't see us. We learned to see each other and turned it into a trending hashtag. Number build you own seat climbed onto Twitter's education trending list within hours. Through it all, my phone kept vibrating on the table. Mom calling, then Dad, then Chloe again. I could almost imagine their voices, the edge of panic under the surface. The sudden realization that the daughter they dismissed had become a headline they couldn't control. That night, as the campus grew quiet and the sun sank behind the spires of Memorial Hall, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The adrenaline had worn off, replaced by a calm so deep it felt unfamiliar. I walked alone through Harvard Yard, the same paths I used to take when I felt invisible. The grass was soft beneath my shoes. The windows of the dorms glowed amber with students packing up for summer. Somewhere, faint music drifted from a celebration, the muffled joy of people who knew they were finally done. I found an empty bench under one of the old elm trees and sat down. Across the way, I could still see the outline of the stage, the faint glimmer of the chairs where everything had unfolded just hours earlier. I pictured that empty seat again, not as loss, but as freedom. When I finally pulled out my phone, there were over 100 unread messages. Mom had written again. We saw it on TV. People keep asking if we're proud. Of course we are. We just wish you'd told us first. For a moment, I let the words sit there. Then I typed, I'm glad you saw it. Today was important to me, and I stopped there. No explanations, no accusations, just a full stop because I realized something simple. Peace doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes from refusing to reopen the wound. Before heading back to the dorm, I called Grandma. She picked up after one ring, her voice warm and steady. I saw the segment again, she said. They played it twice. Your words, they're echoing everywhere. I didn't mean for it to go that far, I admitted. I know, she said. That's why it did. I smiled into the dark. They've been calling nonstop, I said quietly. Mom, Dad, Chloe, I imagine so. She chuckled softly. Let them call. Let them sit with what they missed. There was a pause, the kind only she knew how to hold. Then she added, you didn't embarrass them, Venessa. You revealed them, and sometimes truth is the only mirror that can make people finally see. I didn't reply. I just sat there listening to the rustle of leaves, the echo of laughter somewhere in the distance, and the quiet rhythm of my own breath. The world outside was spinning fast viral posts, interview requests, congratulations. But inside, everything had slowed to a still point. For the first time, I wasn't chasing recognition. I wasn't even chasing understanding. I was simply standing in my own light. The one I'd built, the one no one could take away. When I hung up, I looked toward the faint lights across the river where the reflections trembled on the water like stars. My phone buzzed again. Another call from Chloe. I let it ring, then fade into silence. Somewhere beyond that silence, a new sound began. The bell from Memorial Church, slow and deliberate, marking the hour. Each toll echoed across the yard, through the branches, over the rooftops, a quiet reminder that the day was ending, but the story wasn't. I stood up, tucking the folded speech into my coat pocket. My phone was still vibrating faintly, the screen lighting my hand. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I turned toward the gates, and as I walked into the cool, Cambridge night, I whispered to myself the line that had started it all. When they didn't see us, we learned to see each other. This time, I said it not to the crowd, not to the camera, but to the girl I used to be, the one who'd once sat alone at a forgotten table, dreaming of a seat of her own. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the tall dorm window, painting thin gold lines across the hardwood floor. I'd barely slept. My phone had buzzed until nearly dawn. Missed calls, unread texts, emails stacked like a rising tide. When I finally opened my eyes, the first message waiting on the lock screen wasn't from a journalist or a university official. It was from Mom. We need to talk. This has gone too far. I stared at it for a long moment before unlocking the phone. 5 missed calls from Dad, 2 from Chloe, each with the same tone. Frantic, defensive, performative. I could almost hear it, that brittle blend of guilt and pride. Grandma was already awake, sitting at the small table, by the window in her hotel robe, reading the newspaper. She had circled my photo on the front page with her pen. Harvard graduate speech on inclusion goes viral. She looked up when she heard the notification buzz. They're still calling? She asked quietly. I nodded, sliding the phone onto the table between us. They said I embarrassed them. Grandma folded her paper, adjusting her glasses. Then maybe embarrassment is the only thing that'll make them finally look in the mirror. Her calm gave me courage. I exhaled, picked up the phone, and pressed the call button. When Mom's voice burst through tight and sharp, I switched to speaker. Venessa, what on earth were you thinking? Mom said immediately. Do you know how humiliating this is for us? The neighbors called. The church called. Everyone's asking why we weren't there. You made it sound like we abandoned you. I kept my tone even. You weren't there, Mom. She hesitated, taken aback. That's not fair. We were just tired. I finished for her from Chloe's trip. I know. Dad's voice cut in from the background, low and tense. You could have told us you were valedictorian, Venessa. We would have come if we'd known it was that important. I closed my eyes. You mean if it was something you could brag about? Silence. The kind that hums with old truths no one wants to touch. Grandma leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Robert, she said, her tone firm but calm. You've missed more important things than a title. You missed her growing up building herself from scratch. And now that the world finally saw her, you act as if she's the one who's done wrong. Dad's breath crackled through the speaker. Mother, you don't understand. We supported both our girls equally. It's just Chloe always needed more attention. She had events, competitions, and Venessa had none because you never showed up to the ones she did. Grandma interrupted, her voice cutting clean through the line. I remember the night she won the state essay award. Do you remember that, Judy? You were busy helping Chloe choose her prom dress. Mom's voice wavered. That was years ago. And yet, Grandma said softly, she remembered it enough to write her own ending. The line went quiet. I could almost hear my parents breathing on the other end. The sound of 2 people cornered. Not by accusation, but by fact. Dad tried again. We didn't mean to hurt her. We just thought, well, Chloe needed us more. She's always been fragile. You know how she gets. I looked at Grandma, who raised her eyebrows, the faintest smirk touching her lips. She didn't even need to say it. Fragile or favored. Grandma finally spoke aloud what both of us were thinking. Tired, busy, worried about Chloe. Those are the words you've used for 20 years to excuse the same absence. But love doesn't wait for perfect timing, Robert. Love doesn't choose the convenient child. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the faint hum of traffic outside the window. Mom's voice returned, smaller now. You don't understand, Mother. Venessa was always so independent. We thought she didn't need us. I inhaled sharply, the ache in my throat returning. I didn't need things, Mom. I needed you to show up, that's all. Her breath caught on the line. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Grandma leaned closer to the phone. Judy, you once told me you raised strong girls. But strength without tenderness isn't pride, it's loneliness. Vanessa learned to be strong because you left her no other choice. Dad sighed, the sound fraying at the edges. We were doing our best, Mother. We worked hard, provided everything. Everything. Except presents, Grandma said. And that's the one thing a child never stops waiting for. Mom sniffled softly. Maybe we made mistakes, but we didn't deserve to be painted as heartless. I looked out the window, watching the students below take photos with their families, fathers lifting daughters, mothers crying into bouquets. You weren't painted as anything, I said quietly. You just weren't there. The camera can't capture people who don't show up. Grandma nodded approvingly, her hand resting on my wrist. Mom tried to steady her voice. What do you want us to say, Vanessa? We're proud of you. All right, you've accomplished so much. But this public spectacle could have waited until we were ready. That last word ready echoed in the room. Grandma's eyes hardened. Judy, I've lived long enough to tell you this. Love doesn't wait until you're ready. It shows up when you're needed. And you weren't there when she needed you most. No. I could hear the faint click of my father swallowing. The tension in his throat audible even through the line. What are you saying, Mother? That we're bad parents? No, she said gently. I'm saying you've been absent once. And absence, when repeated enough, becomes a habit people mistake for normal. Mom exhaled shakily. We didn't realize it looked that way. You didn't see, Grandma said, that's the difference. Once free, the silence that followed wasn't angry. It was the silence of truth landing, slow and heavy. I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Finally, I said softly, I'm not calling to blame you. I'm calling because I'm done explaining. Dad spoke carefully now. Then why are you calling at all? I glanced at Grandma, who nodded, her eyes urging me forward. Because I want to give you one more chance, I said. If you want to hear what I've never said, the truth of what it's been like all these years, come to Cambridge tomorrow evening. Just you, Mom and Chloe. No guests, no excuses, just family. Mom hesitated. What do you mean? Hear the truth. I mean, I said, you've heard everyone else's version of me. The quiet daughter, the busy one, the one who doesn't need help. It's time you hear mine. The line went quiet. Then Dad cleared his throat. Well, think about it. Grandma's voice came low and certain. Don't think, just come. And then she reached across the table and ended the call herself, pressing the red button with a firm, deliberate touch. For a while, neither of us spoke. The quiet between us felt sacred. Finally, Grandma said, you've given them a door, Vanessa. Whether they walk through it or not, that's on them. I looked at her, my throat tight. Do you think they'll come? She smiled faintly, folding her newspaper. I think shame is heavy, but curiosity is heavier. They'll come. The question is whether they'll finally listen. Outside, the bells of Memorial Church began to toll again, slow and even, counting down the hours to a conversation 20 years overdue. The next evening, I set a small dinner in my apartment overlooking Harvard Square. The window was cracked open, letting in the scent of late spring rain and the hum of street music drifting up from below. On the dark wooden table, I placed a freshly baked loaf of sourdough, its crust still cracking in the warmth, a pot of tomato soup steaming faintly, a bowl of arugula salad with olive oil and lemon, and a few slices of black pepper cheese. It was simple, humble enough to keep the night from feeling like a performance. 3 candles flickered in old brass holders, their flames swaying gently, steady as breathing. I set 4 bowls, for spoons, and deliberately left no empty chair at the table. The only spare seat I kept was in the corner where I'd hung a small wooden sign for who shows up. They arrived a few minutes late. The knock was hesitant, as if lateness could disguise years of absence. My father entered first, quiet, heavy-eyed, followed by my mother, clutching her purse tight across her chest like a shield. Chloe came last, her coat draped over one arm, eyes darting uncertainly around the room. She lingered on the framed photos. The Charles River at dawn, Wyden her library glowing at night, Sanders Theater empty before rehearsal. I gestured for them to sit. We ate the first few bites in silence, the clinking of spoons on porcelain, soft and awkward, like the sound of people stepping into a room full of truth. I spoke first without circling around what needed to be said. My voice felt steady, rehearsed in the same rhythm I'd practiced before every speech. The empty chairs have followed me all my life, I began. In 8th grade at the state science fair, your seats were empty because you were helping Chloe pick a prom dress. During my junior year research award, I looked down at the reserved signs swaying in the cold air. No one sitting there except the janitor clapping quietly by the door. Even yesterday, I set one chair aside, placed flowers on it, and told myself that emptiness is also a kind of presence. At least it's honest. Now what? I paused, breathing in the scent of tomatoes and candle wax. You used to say, "Good job, honey," then switched the topic back to Chloe's travel plans, her dress fittings, her new internship. I stopped expecting more. I became the footnote in someone else's headline, the sister of Chloe. "I invited you so many times," I said finally, my tone even not angry, and the chairs stayed empty. My father set down his spoon. The sound sharp in the quiet. His hands tightened then folded. "I didn't see," he said after a long silence. "I thought you were fine on your own, that you didn't need me there." The words landed softly, like stones dropped into deep water ripples, not explosions. My mother looked at me longer than she ever had, eyes glassy, but steady. "I thought you were strong," she whispered. "So strong you didn't need your mother." Chloe always needed so much she panicked. She stumbled and I kept rushing to her. Her voice faltered. The sentence from Grandma's call echoed through my mind. Love doesn't choose perfect timing. It chooses to show up. I saw my mother realize what she just confessed. Chloe had been silent the whole time, stirring her spoon in the soup like she was searching for a word she'd never used before. Finally, she looked up. "I was jealous of you," she said softly. I blinked. "Jealous because you could fly without anyone holding you," she said, her voice trembling. "At home, everything revolved around me. I never learned how to stand. And watching you, how the world seemed to find you. I was scared. I thought if I admitted you were better, I'd disappear." There was no triumph in me. Just a strange stillness, the kind that comes when the past finally stopped spinning. We ate slowly. The soup cooled. The salad still smelled of lemon. The bread cracked as it broke. I poured water, the scent of candle wax blending with pepper and olive oil. When the armor of silence had finally melted, I set the boundary as gently as setting the last candle in the middle of the table. "I'm not ready to forgive," I said. "And I don't need to rush it. Forgiveness isn't a check you sign over one dinner. But I'm ready for something new to practice showing up. Next time, just come. Come 5 minutes early. Text to ask what time it starts. Sit in the back row. Take a blurry picture. Just be there." My father nodded, not bowed, but lifted his chin to meet my eyes. "I'll relearn that," he said quietly. My mother exhaled a long breath that sounded like something old finally leaving her body. "I won't promise with words anymore," she said. "I'll promise with when I arrive." Chloe smiled faintly. "Send me the dates that matter," she said. "I'll be there. Even late, I'll still come." After dinner, they wandered around the apartment. On the wall hung my graduation tassel and a printed copy of my speech beneath it, typed in small letters on handmade paper. From the empty chair to the open mic. In the corner rested the wooden chair I'd moved there, its oak smooth under the light, the small sign hanging from its back reading, "For who shows up." My mother touched the edge of the chair as if it were a monument. My father stared at the reflection of himself in the glass of the frame, blurred by time. Chloe took a photo. She didn't post it, just saved it to an album called Things to Remember. When they left, the hallway smelled faintly of hotel soap and rain. I handed my mother her coat. My father reminded Chloe to wear her scarf. No one said, "It's all fixed now," because we knew better. I only said, "Next week I'm giving a small talk at the Cambridge Community Center. Not TEDx, just something for first years, 7:00 p.m. My mother hesitated, then asked, "Should we come early to get seats?" It was the first right question she'd ever asked me. "Early is good," I smiled. "Bring a warm coat." When the door closed, the apartment felt empty, but not hollow. I washed the dishes slowly, the water tapping like a quiet metronome for a new rhythm of family. Slower, truer, present. Before turning off the lights, I straightened the frame, brushed a finger over the tassel, and rested my hand on the wooden chair. It was still empty, but no longer lonely. It was an invitation. Some people will come, some never will, but the chair will always stay there as a quiet rule in my life. Those who show up will have a place. And if you're hearing this somewhere on a train, in your kitchen, or in a city that doesn't yet know your name, remember this. You don't need to be chosen to have worth. Don't wait for someone to pull out a seat at a table that never called for you. Build your own chair from the wood of effort, the nails of patience, and the paint of kindness. Then, when you're steady, pull up more chairs for those who deserve a place beside you. I keep that sign in my home as a reminder for who shows up and you.